On a sunny afternoon on a breezy fall in San Marino, tension was already flaring as drivers headed to the grid. Just a day earlier, drivers such as Ayrton Senna called for the race not to go forward, but the FIA relented. What unfolded next would completely change the entirety of Formula One, with a race weekend that included not one, but two deaths and almost another of one of the biggest future stars the world would ever see. This is the tragedy that shook Formula One to its core and completely changed the game forever. Born on March 21st, 1960, the name Ayrton Senna is one you've probably heard of if you are a big Formula One fan. The Brazilian, who would later become one of the legends of the sport, was born into a wealthy family, but this didn't make it easier at the time to break into the world of motorsport. Eventually, Senna would earn the sponsorships he needed and break into the home of motorsports, which is Europe. Senna continued his rise, winning numerous smaller championships before finding himself driving in a McLaren, a team for whom he would win 3 world championships. However, McLaren's decline would ultimately lead to him moving to industry giants Williams for the 1994 season. The 1994 Formula One season was billed to be one of the greatest ever, with drivers such as Ayrton Senna, Alain Prost, and even the legendary Michael Schumacher on the grid. This was to be an epic season. Just a year prior, Senna, who was still driving for McLaren, found himself struggling with his car. In fact, speculation was that McLaren was not in a position to compete in the 1994 season. This prompted Senna to opt for a move to rivals Williams, who had promised a car that would allow Senna to chase down his 4th world championship. However, Senna would once again be faced with some bad luck, with Williams immediately running into some engine troubles. It would be American manufacturer Ford who stepped up and provided an engine after the first 2 races ended horribly for both Williams drivers. For Senna, there was a little bit of doubt around these engines, as he was seen saying at the Estoril circuit during a testing run, "I have a very negative feeling about driving the car and driving it on the limit and so on. Therefore, I didn't have a single lap that I felt comfortable or reasonably confident. I am uncomfortable with this car." Little did anyone know at the time how Senna was possibly predicting the future. But what was the problem? Well, Senna has a very particular driving style. His rapid tapping of the throttle often put a lot of strain on the components, and Ford was simply not prepared for this style. With Senna now having to be smoother on the pedal, it completely disrupted his confidence. But if there is anyone who can adapt to this, it's the great Ayrton Senna, right? With Williams struggling the first 2 rounds, and Senna not scoring a single point, pressure was slowly mounting on the Brazilian. His lofty ambitions of mounting a title challenge were beginning to fade before his very eyes. However, the next race would be in Imola, a strong circuit for the Brazilian. The 1994 San Marino Grand Prix was supposed to go like every other race that had come before it. During the first practice session on a Friday afternoon, things already began to unravel. Senna's teammate, Rubens Barrichello, another Brazilian who would go on to do great things, found himself in the wall at the Variant Barça chicane. During the same time, Senna was on track and noticed the incident where he would stop and get out of his own car, risking his own safety to run to the aid of Barrichello. Upon arriving at the scene, Senna immediately turned off the car. The move was later confirmed to be what ultimately saved Barrichello, and it gave FIA doctor Sid Watkins enough time to save the young Brazilian. It was discovered that Barrichello essentially swallowed his tongue and was in the process of suffocating with a car that nearly caught on fire. The incident would scar Senna, who reporters say later broke down in tears in his hotel room and demanded that the Williams be thoroughly inspected by himself and the engineers. But surprisingly, Senna was back the following morning, ending the morning session with a personal best time, and many thought that perhaps his fortunes would change. Later, in the afternoon qualifying session, another tragedy would hit, but this time it would impact the whole of the Formula One grid. Just 18 minutes into qualifying, the whole Imola was in shock, with deafening silence embodying everyone in the crowd. Simtek driver Roland Ratzenberger was about to pass through the infamous Villeneuve chicane, where he lost control and veered off straight into the concrete barriers. The speed of the crash is estimated to be around 195 miles per hour, suggesting that the G-force he was pulling on impact could have been more than 50, but this has not been confirmed. Once again, it was Senna who witnessed the crash from his garage and would commandeer a marshal car as he rushed out to the scene of the crash. However, by the time the Brazilian arrived, Ratzenberger was already transferred to an ambulance. Upon returning to the garage, Senna found out the horrible news that Roland Ratzenberger passed away, and this forced him to retire from qualifying without even setting a lap time. Senna was once again said to have broken down in tears, and after a conversation with FIA medical personnel Sid Watkins, he was even discouraged from taking the grid. But this single tragedy was not enough for the FIA to stop or even postpone the race, a decision many would regret for the rest of their lives. Reeling from what happened the day prior, Senna found out that he would still be given a pole. His impressive lap the day prior would earn him this right as qualification ceased after the passing of Ratzenberger. The pressure was mounting on a Sunday morning, and by the time it was lights out, Senna seemed like a man on a mission. Starting the race from the pole, he managed to keep his lead through the first few corners, but another incident would once again overshadow this race. This time it was Pedro Lamy and JJ Letho who were involved in a massive collision. The accident led to debris piling up on the track, and the safety car was summoned. Back in the early 90s, the safety car was not the performance vehicle you see today. There were no Mercedes-AMG or Aston Martin supercars. In fact, it was a traditional Opel Vectra which served as a safety car, a vehicle marketed to the public as a traditional family sedan. One of the problems with this Opel Vectra was its top speed, which meant that drivers were losing increasing heat on their tires and brakes. If you know anything about physics and tires, you'll quickly realize just how dangerous cold tires and brakes are at such incredible speeds. Nonetheless, Senna, growing increasingly frustrated, pulled up next to the safety car, urging it to speed up. Unfortunately, the driver of the safety car was already pushing this family sedan to its limits. A few moments later, the debris was cleared off the track and the safety car pulled into the pit lane, releasing behind it a line of incredible speed and performance heading into Turn 1. Ahead of the pack was none other than Senna, who managed to switch on his tires before anyone else. In fact, Senna was setting fastest lap after the restart, looking absolutely unstoppable. But on lap 7, the world would be shocked for a final time by the Brazilian master. Senna, who was still pushing, chose a slightly different line through the Tamburello chicane when suddenly he veered off into an unprotected concrete barrier. In fact, Senna was pushing so hard that when he lost control, the car was still speeding along at a whopping 192 miles per hour before coming to a sudden stop against concrete. By the time marshals arrived, Senna was unconscious and he was immediately evacuated to the nearest hospital. Reports suggest that the helicopter containing an unconscious Senna arrived at Maggiore Hospital at 3 p.m., exactly 43 minutes after the crash had occurred. 10 minutes later, Senna's heart stopped, but doctors quickly resuscitated the Brazilian. Unfortunately, this would be in vain as Senna would ultimately pass away at 18:37 on May 1st, 1994. Michael Schumacher ultimately won the race, but said that it felt hollow and wasn't even seen celebrating. It was later confirmed that the crash haunted Schumacher, and he even mentioned that it felt like seeing his own death after the race. Perhaps this incident could have been prevented. Perhaps the FIA should have heeded the warnings of Senna after the Ratzenberger incident, or perhaps Senna should not have pushed as much. There are many what-ifs, but the fact of the matter remains that the death of Ayrton Senna was a tragedy, to say the very least. The incident still stands as a stark reminder of just how dangerous Formula One is and how drivers risk their lives every single weekend for our entertainment. If you agree, please like this video and subscribe so you don't miss any incredible stories from the F1 paddock.